What's going on, everybody, and welcome back into the channel, Brenden Schaeffer Fantasy Football. It's been a few weeks since I've put out a video. Had a lot going on at the beginning of this NFL season, COVID, various things going on in my household, but I'm trying to get back into it now. Week 4 of the NFL season. This is the prime time of year as we start to get into the bye weeks beginning in Week 5 to start thinking about trades for your fantasy roster. So what I'm hoping to do, start with this video right here and do it every week moving forward, is a little exercise that I think could be really helpful when trying to identify what trades you need to make in a given fantasy football week. And what that's going to involve is simply starting by looking at last week's numbers and the players that either overperformed or underperformed their expectations, and try to figure out, okay, of the players that maybe fell short of expectations, which of those players are actually worth targeting in fantasy trade offers this week and which are just not realistic. And a lot of them you may find, okay, not realistic to target this player because, yeah, he had a bad week, but everybody in the fantasy community knows what to expect with this guy. So it's just not realistic that we'll be able to pry him from the manager that that currently has him. That's going to be the case oftentimes. However, it's not always going to be the case. And I would say even with the players that we would say, oh, there's no chance, look at the opponent's team. Look at the other teams in your league. And there might be a week where the stars align. And maybe, especially coming up when bye weeks begin in Week 5, maybe the situation for that guy is, okay, he had a player that just had a bad week, and he also has a player at that same position on bye this week, and he really feels desperate for a win because he's 1-2 or 1-3 in the standings. That might be where the stars align for you to take a shot at a player that you can basically buy at his floor, at his lowest value, because even though we don't like to admit it, the reality is that recency bias creeps into our fantasy analysis all the time, and in some ways that should be the case. But in others, we should be anchored to when a guy's got a track record over the long period of time, this is what this player is likely to do, so let's not get caught up in the now of it all. But situations do change. We're going to talk about one player, and it's a guy that's a huge name in fantasy football, and I actually put a trade offer together for him this morning, Tuesday morning, September 26th, and it was accepted. Now, is that something that you can expect right away to happen in your leagues? No, but you get to know your league managers. You get to know who's willing to kind of play ball on trades, who's a little bit more conservative when it comes to making deals in the middle of a season, and you never know. You might end up coming up with a trade that you didn't expect. And so that's what we're kind of getting into today. Let's go ahead and get started, though. I'm going to look through at wide receivers to begin. And all I've done here is on Yahoo. I normally do things on Sleeper, but on my laptop, it just doesn't look as good on the video to show what I'm trying to show here, which is just the players, all players. I've sorted by all. It doesn't matter if they're rostered, not rostered, whatever. Wide receiver is where we're going to begin in Week 3. We're going to look at their stats from just this past week. Keenan Allen, Devontae Adams had huge weeks. I think that can be expected probably for both guys to continue. Adam Thielen. How about Adam Thielen going for 31 this week? If that's a guy that you maybe want to trade away, given the way he performed this week. But we're going to start by kind of rifling through these real quick and going down the list to find the players that we might be able to come up with in terms of trading for. We're going to start with trade for candidates, and then we'll maybe look at guys that should you look to trade a guy away off of a big week? Because if you're selling high and buying low over and over and over again throughout a fantasy season, that's probably how you're going to end up making some pretty quality deals and ending up with a roster at the end, provided injuries don't hurt you. That could be pretty stacked. Let's go ahead and start around this 10, 12-point mark because there are guys who, Puka Nacua is the name that jumps out first for me. Did Puka Nacua have a great week? No, but he kind of showed the floor of a guy that you can put in your wide receiver spot in PPR. This is a PPR setting, and you're going to be pretty happy with the results. But what is happening in Puka Nacua's world that could change his productivity soon? Cooper Kupp coming back. So I think Puka Nacua, if you're worried about Cooper Kupp returning to the Rams lineup anytime soon, we haven't really heard updates other than Sean McVay saying a couple of weeks ago that, Cooper Kupp is a guy that should be back by Week 5. They're hopeful he'll be back by Week 5. If you're worried about that, maybe Puka Nacua did just well enough this week to where you can actually try and trade him away. And another manager can say, oh, man, that's 3 weeks in a row where he's gone for double-digit fantasy points. It didn't have as robust of a production this week, but still pretty good. And if you're worried about Cooper Kupp, this might be the time to trade away Puka Nacua. But I tend to believe that even when Cooper Kupp returns, Nakua's a good player, and even if the volume's not going to be the same, he still might be startable in fantasy. But these are the things you have to make decisions about, right? Fantasy analysts and people who say they're experts, they don't know any better than you do necessarily. There are going to be times where they have insights on things, but largely I think it's just the role to kind of guide people and say, hey, if you're thinking about this player, his situation's about to change. So be thinking about how you want to handle that for Puka Nacua. But then below that, we're going to begin to look at guys who we could try to trade for this week. Nobody really in this range from Michael Thomas, Gabe Davis. I don't really think there's anything here or there about his week. CeeDee Lamb is the first name that comes to mind, though. Only 10 points this week. If you look at the numbers for CeeDee Lamb, we'll check out his game log here. Had the one really great week against the Jets, but otherwise we're just seeing 4 receptions. And you might kind of wonder, okay, is this a guy who is basically what we've come to know CeeDee Lamb to be, a stud wide receiver 1? Yeah, that's what CeeDee Lamb is, and Dallas just kind of had a down week. So if you can catch an owner napping that says, all right, I'm just tired of the volatility of CeeDee Lamb, there aren't 10 wide receivers in fantasy that I'd rather have on my team than CeeDee Lamb. So that's a guy that, look, are you going to be able to pry him away from a savvy owner? Probably not, but you just never know until you just send an offer out. We're always looking to do 2-for-1, 3-for-2 types of offers. And if the guy says, hey, dude, I get what you're trying to do here, not trading CeeDee Lamb, all right, you don't make that trade. You don't pursue that trade. But you never know. You might find somebody vulnerable and willing to make a move. And we're just trying to identify the guys that it might be worth trying on, right? Like, I was going to scroll up, but we saw Davante Adams, 42 points at the top. This would be a terrible week to trade for Davante Adams. It would be a great week to trade him away if you think, oh, he's not going to do that every week. But Davante Adams is in that tier of wide receivers where you just expect he's going to be doing what he's doing. So you probably, if you have him, you're happy to have him and you're not trading him away. But even if these deals aren't likely to take place, the likeliest time is when a guy just had a down week. That's the best chance you're ever going to have. So you might as well try it if you're looking for a guy that you'd love to get on your roster. CeeDee Lamb would be the first guy that pops into mind for me. Garrett Wilson is another candidate, right? Just 9 points this week. But is the situation for Garrett Wilson concerning enough that you don't want him as a trade for candidate? I would say that it is. He's not somebody that I'm necessarily looking to target unless I'm able to find an owner panicking on him. And I don't think you're going to find anybody panicking yet on Garrett Wilson. If they didn't panic with what happened in week 1, Aaron Rodgers being injured, then they're probably not going to start panicking at this point. So I don't think he's as great of an example because I expect CeeDee Lamb to certainly be in a tier above Garrett Wilson. Garrett Wilson's quarterback downgrade is a real thing, and I don't know if right now is the time to trade for him. I think if you were to trade for him, it's about the value that is fair and expected. He's going to be a guy hovering between 10 and 14, 15 points unless he finds the end zone, has a chance to kind of save himself. If I'm a Garrett Wilson manager, I'm trying to trade him away after he scores a touchdown in a given week. Didn't happen this week, so probably not the week to move on from Garrett Wilson. But there's a world in which Garrett Wilson has an explosive performance, let's say week 4, and he scores a touchdown and goes for 100 yards, 24 fantasy points. And there's a guy like CeeDee Lamb who maybe he has another sort of 9 fantasy point outing, 4 for 53. Well, at that point, I'm happy to try to take my Garrett Wilson and trade him for CeeDee Lamb because I'm anchored to the belief that CeeDee Lamb is going to be in a better situation long term. Am I correct about that? We won't know. Don't ever treat things like they're definitive in fantasy, but you have to have your takes about players and decide, okay, this is what I believe about these two players. If there's a moment in time where another manager might be confused about that being the case, maybe he normally believes that, but he saw CeeDee Lamb go 8, 9 points in consecutive weeks, and he's getting tired of it. Maybe he wants the Garrett Wilson for the CeeDee Lamb. Those trades are possible to be made. And it's just the style of when you go about trying to make it happen that I think is of utmost importance. Tyler Lockett, 8 points. I think this would be a fine time to trade for Tyler Lockett. He's in that more wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 tier for me in 12-team leagues. But in PPR, I mean, he's still going to have games where he gets peppered a little more than he did in this one. But if you look at Tyler Lockett's numbers at this point, 7 targets, just didn't turn into a lot of points. There might be people that look at Tyler Lockett's first 3 weeks and say, oh, man, that 25 is just, he's going to do that 4 times a year, but just otherwise he's going to kill your lineup. I don't happen to believe that. So for me, Tyler Lockett's very interesting, but you could also take the shot that he kind of has another single-digit outing, and then going into a bye week, I guarantee you, if Tyler Lockett doesn't produce 10 points this week on Monday Night Football against the Giants, there are going to be people week 5 that are saying, all right, he's on his bye anyway. I'm ready to get rid of him. So Tyler Lockett would be a soft trade for candidate, not as good of an option as CeeDee Lamb this week, but might be more attainable because Lockett's had 2 weeks that have been kind of bummers in the single digits. DeAndre Hopkins, another big name, only 7.8 fantasy points. Is he a trade for candidate this week? For me, no, he's not, because I honestly think you could see more of this. Buddy Hunter has him on his team. His team is named Broken, Fragile, Washed, if it gives you any indication on how he's feeling about DeAndre Hopkins and company. This is kind of what you might see. This offense for Tennessee is struggling, and I don't know if that's necessarily going to turn around. Granted, tough matchup against Cleveland's good defense this week. Cincinnati kind of played an ugly one against the Rams. They've got good defense, and maybe that's another situation where Hopkins just doesn't thrive this next week. The target volume is there. 13, 5, and 7 is certainly fine. Maybe you're hoping for some better matchups down the road, but then Hopkins gets into his bye week. For me, not necessarily a trade candidate, but if people are treating him like a guy that they're afraid to start, and you can trade a flex caliber player for DeAndre Hopkins, still worth maybe taking the shot on the guy that you know is going to get volume and has a reputation. But you just don't want to be caught holding the bag on older players. That's kind of the risk when it comes to Hopkins. So I don't think he would cost a ton necessarily. It's all context, though. You're always trying to trade lesser players into players that are more robust. And let's go a little bit earlier, actually, and see, is there a wide receiver that we would say, hey, pull the trigger on trading this guy for Hopkins right now? Like Tank Dell. Would you trade Dell for Hopkins? I wouldn't. I think I'd rather have Tank Dell because I'm believing what we're seeing about his first couple of weeks. Looking for some other examples. You're looking for guys that had weeks that are better than you normally would expect. Cortland Sutton for Hopkins is kind of an interesting tier there. The Denver Broncos are struggling, but we're seeing Cortland Sutton. He had a nice week of 19 fantasy points. I think, honestly, probably more passing upside in the Broncos offense, so I'm going to lean Sutton over DeAndre Hopkins. And let me know in the comments if you have an example of two players you'd like for me to compare, or a player that you would say, hey, I want to go get this guy. Here's my team. Who should I consider moving to make this happen? And a lot of times what I like to do is actually reverse engineer my trades, where I have guys I'm trying to get rid of because I know they just had a spike week, and this is the time to move them. I'm looking at a tier of players. Can I get a running back, and he's got to be in this tier? I'll get the best name that I possibly can, regardless of whether I want that player. It's exactly what I did this morning, and I'll tell you when we get to running backs, the deal that I made. It does involve Devon Achane and Zach Moss, two of the guys that you would say had huge weeks. Who did I turn those two into at the running back position? I'll let you know if you keep watching this video. But hit subscribe on the channel if you enjoy content like this. Again, we're still looking for a name that we would comfortably trade for Hopkins. Tutu Atwell is an interesting name. You have Cooper Kupp coming back, and we believe that Puka Nacua is here to stay. Can Tutu Atwell, in a Rams offense that's not super strong necessarily, just 19.5 points per game over the past 2 weeks, had a great week 1 with 30 points against Seattle. But you see Tutu, 8 targets, 9 targets, 9 targets. He's pretty efficient with his targets. He's finding the end zone yesterday in garbage time that absolutely just crushed me with my Bengals bet. But look at this, 17, 15, 17 points. Could you realistically get Hopkins for Tutu Atwell? I think you could. You just have to make the decision as a fantasy player, is that the type of move I want to make, knowing that Tutu could be about to decline a little bit. And let's say you make that move, and then, fantasy managers are creatures of habit, and sometimes those habits can be influenced by what just happened. And let's say you do trade Tutu for Hopkins, and Hopkins is seeing some good target volume. You could see a way to flip him down the road after a good week, and you may want Tutu Atwell back. You could probably get him back if he should decline for a couple of weeks, and you think, oh, the manager that has him is going to be upset about that. These are the kinds of things that we're thinking about constantly when it comes to fantasy trades. So Atwell, interesting name. Would you rather have Atwell or Hopkins? I think it's a question. I think it's a question that some people could have. And you may find that you go, no, I want to keep my Atwell. I don't consider Hopkins to be a good trade for target this week. Here's a guy that I think is a great trade for target, Calvin Ridley. We saw week 1 what he could potentially do in this offense. 11 targets, 8 receptions, 100 yards, a touchdown. He was fantastic. But it was against a lesser Indy defense. And now we've seen the Chiefs defense and the Houston defense, which I think is going to be surprisingly decent. That Houston Texans defense is playing well. And you see he's fallen well short of projections. 2 for 8. He gets 8 targets still, but 2 catches. 3 for 7. Great target volume. He's not producing. a 5 and a 7. After one bad week, I even got a message from the guy that is in this league with Calvin Ridley. He said, I know I'm going to get a message from Schaeffer this week for Calvin Ridley. And I don't even know if I ended up sending him anything. But now another week has gone by. You just test the people's patience. And you say, all right, how patient are you with Calvin Ridley? Or how concerned are you with the Jaguars offense that 2 games in a row has not looked good? I don't have any concern at all about that offense. I think over the course of the season, Trevor Lawrence and company figure it out. They're going through some things. Where is Doug Peterson going to call the plays? They are in some turmoil. There's no doubt about that. But I think Calvin Ridley showed you week 1 that he's not washed as a talent, and I think he just needs to get on the same page as Trevor Lawrence. But you saw the target volume. Calvin Ridley, a great trade for target. Is it realistic? I don't know. You have to think about who's a guy that, if this trade gets accepted, I won't be upset because I upgraded, and I now have a better player than I had previously, even though the guy that I have right now, my Tutu Atwell or my Puka Nacua, I'd trade Puka for Ridley absolutely. I think that Ridley long-term is going to be, but you have to make those kinds of decisions as you approach these offers, and you send them out into the ether, and if they get rejected, you say, no worries, I like my Puka Nacua, but I think if I could get a Calvin Ridley, which again, you probably add something to Puka Nacua. Maybe the guy needs running back depth, and you add, an A-Chain or a Zach Moss, and you come up with Calvin Ridley. I'm going to present these possibilities of trades you could try to pursue. That doesn't mean the guy in your league is going to accept them. Largely, if we're making a trade and we're saying go get Calvin Ridley, it shouldn't be easy, right? It should be worthwhile to struggle with and to negotiate and see if you can't come away with a guy. And if you ultimately fail, you're no worse off than you were before. And yeah, you might say, my league mates aren't going to like this if I'm peppering with offers for their best guys. That's fantasy football. For me, you just have to kind of have a temperament about it and know that, it's part of the deal. If you want to improve your team, you look for these kind of opportunities. Devontae Smith is another example. A.J. Brown finally was kind of the alpha of the Eagle passing offense this week. I think he kind of will continue to be, but what you can expect is big play volatility from Smith. And last week, he only had 5 targets, exact same as this week, 4 for 5, but in one of those weeks, he went for 131 and 1. This week, 28 and 0. You'll have these weeks for Smith. I think he'll have just as many of these weeks where he goes for 17 and 23 points in PPR. He won't get 10 targets that often, but he'll score some touchdowns. He'll complete big passes down the field. Devontae Smith, definitely a trade for target for me this week because I trust that what happened this week, even though it'll happen occasionally, it's not going to happen every week, which is why it's going to be difficult to get Smith. But I think it's worthwhile. If you're ever going to try to make an offer for Smith, this would be the best week to do it because he did just have a down week. Drake London is not ever going to be a trade for target for me because I just don't think that the 18 he got last week is going to be the norm. I think the 5 he got this week is going to be the norm. If I had Drake London, I'm waiting for a week where he scores a touchdown and I trade him that week, that Tuesday, that Wednesday. You find a way to make that deal happen. I've got Jahan Dotson here. I still think he's a trade for because there might be people that drop Jahan Dotson this week. And Sam Howell hasn't played as well at the quarterback position as I would have hoped, but I do believe that he's going to improve, and I think Jahan Dotson will be the beneficiary when he does. Don't start Jahan Dotson right now. He's a trade for. That being said, if I can package him and I'm trading away 2 or 3 players that are solid players, and Dotson's kind of the kicker for me getting a big name like Devontae Smith, if I'm trading Zay Flowers and Jahan Dotson for Devontae Smith, I like that trade this week. Is it possible to do? I don't know. Well, I've got it pending, actually. It's an offer in my league. But there might be somebody that doesn't see Jahan Dotson as even rosterable right now. That's where it's a little bit tough to make the trades. You've got to trade guys after their good weeks. And right now, we just haven't seen any from Jahan Dotson. But we know from the end of last year that he's capable of having those weeks, which is why I'm hesitant to trade him away. I would trade for him if I don't have him because I think you can get him for pennies on the dollar. But if I have to include him in a deal where somebody else values him the way that I do, and I'm kicking him in as the third piece to get a real big fish, then I'm okay with doing that. T. Higgins is interesting this week. 4 fantasy points. He didn't have a catch in the first game. His target volume is fantastic. He looks bad, though. I mean, he dropped at least 2 or 3 passes, 8 targets, 2 receptions. This inefficiency, he had one great game in week 2 with 2 touchdowns. But the other 2 weeks, 2 catches for 16 targets. And he almost has as many targets as he does yards if you combine week 1 and 3. Not good from T. Higgins, and a little bit concerning that, he played badly. He had opportunities and he didn't take advantage of them. I think unless you find somebody so frustrated with T. Higgins, I don't think it's probably worth pursuing. But if you can get him for a flex candidate, again, Tutu Atwell for T. Higgins. It's T. Higgins by a mile. There's no doubt. Nico Collins had a down week. But let's say Nico Collins had continued on this trajectory. Like, if you had a guy that's Nico Collins, think about what you think about Nico Collins in your mind. Like, the way you as a fantasy player look at that individual. And he goes 14, 27 and gets 20 total targets in the first 2 weeks. Could you have traded that Nico Collins for T. Higgins if T. Higgins had done this the first 2 weeks instead of had the big week 2? Like, these are the types of scenarios you're looking for. This isn't a perfect match because, well, Nico Collins had a bad week this week, and honestly, that you're going to have volatility with wide receivers on a team like the Texans. But it's just interesting to say, oh, now I know what to look for in terms of the possibilities that I can make something happen. Let's find a name where we go, hey, T. Higgins. Would we make this deal? Christian Kirk or T. Higgins, I think is fascinating. Because Christian Kirk is kind of getting back into the mindset of where he was last year. I prefer T. Higgins, though. And I think that's a deal that could honestly get done, depending on where a manager is on T. Higgins. The grass is always going to feel greener on the other side. Zay Flowers for T. Higgins. You can look at Zay Flowers and say, wow, he's just been so consistent. Double-digit points every week. I actually have him on this roster that I'm looking at. The target volume is great, but no Odell Beckham in this last game. Is he going to see 10 targets every game? Probably not. So you might be able to say, hey, I think he's a great player, great up-and-coming player, but is not necessarily going to emerge as the T. Higgins level ceiling this year for Zay Flowers. I don't think Zay scored any touchdowns. That's the kind of move that you're thinking of when you go, well, am I willing to take a shot on a guy that I would flex like Zay Flowers for T. Higgins? Yeah, I think you do. And you always are willing to add a bench bat to any trade to make it a 2-for-1. Jahan Dotson and Zay Flowers for T. Higgins. I don't know. That's a trade that I probably could offer in my league because I have those two players, Dotson and Flowers. I don't know if I'll offer that deal or not, but I think objectively, those are the kinds of things that we're looking for. If I weren't just so down on T. Higgins like the way he performed last night, that's probably a no-brainer offer to send, and the other guy probably rejects it. But again, it doesn't hurt you any if he does. Down here at the bitter end, there's one more name that I want to bring up. I want to make sure I didn't miss anybody. Let's see how long we are on time here. Yeah, it's going to be a little bit of a longer video. But let me know in the future if you want me to just rocket through these. I can try and tighten these videos up a little bit. I may do the full-scale running back video next and separate out into a different video. I will tell you who I got for Zach Moss and Devon Achane, though, because I think you're gonna say I won this trade, but I want to explain why these trades are possible to happen because people overreact. Anybody else besides T. Higgins at the wide receiver position? Quentin Johnston, pick him up off of waivers. This isn't a waiver video, but he's going to have to still pass Josh Palmer, but Josh Palmer's been playing well even with Mike Williams healthy, and now Mike Williams is out for the year. So Quentin Johnston will be a guy that I probably try to claim on waivers if I have a bench spot open this week. The only other name I want to bring up is Jackson Smith and Jigba. If he gets dropped, pick him up. Pick him up and stash him on the bench. You're not going to be starting him this week, and you don't get to use him on his bye week. But there will come the possibility that he is the Jahan Dotson of this season still. Rookies, sometimes they start slow. It doesn't mean they're bad players. I considered trading Jahan Dotson plus something else for Smith and Jigba in this league. But then I made my big running back trade, and I kind of decided, okay, I'm not sure if I want to do that. Let's take that trade offer off the board for now and see what we're working with. Okay, before I get out of here for this video, and I'll do a full breakdown of the running back position. So in the comments, let me know who are what do you want to know about trade for candidates at wide receiver or running back? I'm going to do a full breakdown video next of the running back trade for candidates of the week. This is the first time I'm doing this video, so I tend to talk a little bit long, and I'll continue to tighten these up so that you guys are just getting the best information. And I'll try to have this be a series that I do every week. 10-minute video of trade for candidates, 10-minute video of trade away candidates at running back and at wide receiver. That'll be a video series that we're working on. So again, you're just seeing the raw material, the very first edition of this. It's gonna get smoother as we go. Devon Achane, 51 points. Holy freaking smokes. He was on my bench. Big time bummer. I lost by like a point to A.J. Brown last night. Okay, Devon Achane, though, 51 points. What do we actually think of Devon Achane moving forward? Well, he's not going to get 51 every week. And this was kind of a blowout, so did he see more carries than he otherwise would? Maybe so. However, I think he's a really talented player. I targeted him in all my drafts for a reason. What I think about him is that he's the number 2 running back behind Raheem Mostert, but both guys are going to play. But it's in one of the best offenses in the NFL. I mean, they just hung 70, for goodness sake. And he can catch passes, 4 for 30 and 2 touchdowns. He's explosive. He is going to be a menace. I like him. I think he's RB2 caliber already. Maybe higher than that. I also think Raheem Mostert is going to get hurt because he always does. Raheem Mostert has been unbelievable for fantasy so far this year. He's not, I play fantasy like he's not lasting the season. So I value A-Chain pretty highly. Zach Moss, 22.5 fantasy points this past week. He got 30 carries in the Colts win over Baltimore. 2 weeks in a row that he's had 20-plus fantasy points and 20-plus opportunities to touch the football. But we all know that Jonathan Taylor is potentially looming. Could return week 5. Will he continue to say, I don't want to play for the Colts, you got to trade me? If so, Zach Moss is an every week starter the rest of the season. RB2 caliber or better. So these are 2 players that I consider to be pretty good players. I traded both of them today, Tuesday, the 26th of September. I traded him for Derrick Henry. I also picked up Hollywood Brown in this trade. It was a 2-for-2 deal. A-Chain, Zach Moss for Derrick Henry, and Hollywood Brown. Hollywood Brown I pick up as kind of a wide receiver 4. My wide receiver is very strong in this league. Here's what we're looking at with Derrick Henry. It's a very fascinating situation. And I wish I were able to pull this up on Sleeper, because you would see on Sleeper that Derrick Henry only played 38% of snaps this past week for a porous, terrible Titans offense. Scored 3 points. Henry went 2 fantasy points. He had 11 for 20, no targets. I think Tyjae Spears actually played more snaps. But it was a game script thing. And you look at the first 2 weeks, despite just a terrible offensive line for the Titans, 13 points, 18 fantasy points, good amount of opportunities, even mixed in the passing game a little bit for Derrick Henry. I am betting that Derrick Henry is not completely and entirely washed with this trade. But this is such a good example of what you can try to do. Because right now, the fantasy community isn't going to know what to think of Devon A-Chain and Zach Moss. There are going to be a lot of different opinions on those 2 players. A-Chain had 50 fantasy points this week, but not many people got to take advantage of it because he was on their benches. He's on my bench. Zach Moss was in my lineup. 22 fantasy points. I think he's going to continue to be really solid, but is the Colts offense going to be that good every game? Not necessarily. Maybe Zach Moss at 25 years old is just a stud and we just should have seen it coming. I don't love Zach Moss's talent necessarily. And I also know that Jonathan Taylor could come back and take away a lot of his playing time. That could be happening in 2 weeks. And it cost me nothing to get Zach Moss on my team. It cost me a waiver priority. I claimed him a couple of weeks ago after week 1. He served me well, a couple of good weeks for my team. But Derrick Henry's Derrick Henry, right? But how concerned are we about Derrick Henry? Because the reactions to this trade in my league, people are acting like I stole Derrick Henry and that I fleeced the guy. And I don't know. I think I like my side of the trade, but there is risk here. Derrick Henry could turn into a pumpkin in the same way that we feel DeAndre Hopkins could, because of the fact that he's 29 years old. He's playing way fewer snaps. They're playing Tyjae Spears a lot, and he could just potentially be inefficient on a number of these weeks and cost you in your lineup. I think Derrick Henry's got to be downgraded for sure. Is he still top 14 running back? I don't know, but it's the borderline. It's the borderline. Here's what I will say, though, about Derrick Henry. Assume you're making the playoffs. He gets Houston, Seattle, Houston in the fantasy playoffs. It could be some bumpy times ahead for Henry, and I'm not committed to the fact that I won't try to flip him in a deal, because there's going to be one manager that values Derrick Henry more than the guy that I got him from, and that's how you can continue to upgrade your team. But I'm not likely to be able to get rid of Derrick Henry off of a 2-point game. I'm going to need him to play better. I'm going to need him to have a vintage Derrick Henry week, and then I probably do look to trade him off of that week, because if I can trade Derrick Henry for another running back in his tier, then that's exactly what we're doing with these videos. That is the whole point. I'll show you guys my team so you can get an idea of whether or not the stuff I'm telling you in these videos is possible. This is a 14-team league. You don't care, but I'm just going to show you briefly. My wide receivers, Olave, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Waddle, Zay Flowers. We've got Jahan Dotson. on the bench along with Marquise Brown. We've got Jonathan Taylor stashed in IR. This is from making these types of trades for the first 3 weeks of the season. Is it always going to be as possible as this? No. You're going to have some leagues that they say, nobody in my league trades. All right? Don't look at this and just say, oh, this is what it's supposed to look like. This is rare, but I can tell you that by doing this, I have done every single sell high, buy low that I could possibly do to get this lineup. I drafted Olave. I drafted Amon-Ra St. Brown. Some of these guys. I drafted Kirk Cousins, who's been fantastic. I drafted a lot of these guys. A lot of them have been, I've drafted Jonathan Taylor. But it's also possible to catch guys napping and catch them panicking. Week 1, Thursday night, the guy who had Jahmyr Gibbs saw David Montgomery getting all the opportunity, and I was able to make a trade that day for Jahmyr Gibbs. Didn't get to use him until week 2. And you might say, well, what's so special about Jahmyr Gibbs? Well, maybe nothing so far. Maybe he's just an average kind of flex-worthy running back. I'm here to bet that the talent is going to win out over the course of a season, and rookie running backs always get better as they go along. I got a bunch of trades pending right now, sending out offers always. If you like somebody that thinks at least the way that I think, it may not be possible to do what to do what I've done here. It may not be possible to make trades that freely, but there are going to be people out there that have leagues that you can do this in. So if you like this content, let me know. I'm going to go ahead and post this video and get started on the running back version of the video. Going to try to make that one a little bit shorter so you guys can actually have some value out of this. Let me know what you want to see from these videos because it'll be a weekly series. I love the draft content, but there are things I think you can do during the season that can help you win championships and just get you thinking in a certain frame of mind, thinking in a certain way that could help you as we go along here. So let me know what you think. Hit subscribe on this channel, and we'll talk to you soon on Brenden Schaeffer Fantasy Football.